On today's episode of Locked On Stars, we will begin a new series where we will be reviewing and evaluating individual player performances from the past season. In today's show, we shine the spotlight on Joe Pavelski. We'll talk about his biggest moments of the season, talk about why he continues to be so successful in the twilight of his career, and talk about what the 2022-2023 season will look like for Captain America. All coming up on a midweek edition of Locked On Stars.
You're Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, your local expert on all things Dallas Stars hockey, credentialed member of the Dallas Stars media, coming to you on this Wednesday, May 18th. And whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener, thank you for stopping by and making the Locked On Stars podcast your first listen of the day. We are free and available no matter where you listen or how you listen. Be sure to subscribe to our show on YouTube as well as your favorite podcasting platform. And of course, always feel free to leave a comment, rating, or review if you like what you hear. You can also find me on Twitter at Dane_Lewis and our show on Twitter as well at Locked On Stars. But without any further hesitation, let's jump into today's episode and jump into this new series that we will be doing over the course of the next handful of episodes, where we revisit the past season on an individual player-by-player basis. We're going to talk about individual performances from guys on this Dallas Stars team, talk about the best moments of their season, maybe talk about some improvements, or talk about the reason for their success, and talk about what the next season might look like for them, whether they're going to be a member of the Stars or whether they might be moving on to a different organization. And as I said in the cold open, today we will be starting with one of the fan favorites, and a pretty easy fan favorite over the past few years here in Dallas. I'm, of course, talking about Captain America, number 16, Joe Pavelski. And what a season it was for Pavs. He put up his best statistical year to date, 12 seasons in to his career, 27 goals, 54 assists, and 81 points in total, a career high in points and assists. And the best part about his stats, 82 games played at age 37. Joe Pavelski played every single game for the Dallas Stars this season, which is incredible. I mean, this is one of the most physical sports, one of the most demanding sports, where we see guys get injured. And even if it's just for a couple of games, we see guys miss time just due to the harsh nature of the sport of hockey. But Joe Pavelski able to power through after playing all 56 games in the previous season in that condensed COVID-shortened season. He plays every game then, and he comes out and plays all 82 games this past season. Absolutely incredible to see the strength and durability of Joe Pavelski here in the latter stages of his career. Not only playing all those games, but again, setting a career high in assists and total points with 81. Truly insane. Pretty much a point per game player. 81 points in 82 games played is a fantastic stat line for any hockey player, but especially a guy who is 12 seasons into his career at age 37. But on top of that, as if that isn't impressive enough, Joe Pavelski set several new milestones this season. He had 400 career goals reached on November 26th against the Colorado Avalanche. That game shortly after Thanksgiving back at home. This is when the Stars were really starting to click as a team. This is kind of in the middle of that 7-game win streak that they went on. This is when the power play was at its best. This is when the top line was guaranteed to score at least one goal in about the first 30 seconds to 1 minute of every single game. And that's exactly what happened in this game. If you remember, this both of these goals were within the first 2 minutes of this Stars Avalanche matchup. So it was 2 Minutemen goals. And the first one, a classic Joe Pavelski goal, a nice tip in with the stick off an initial shot. And then the second one, just a great connection with Rope Hintz to beat Darcy Kemper twice in the first 2 minutes of that game, leading the Stars past the division favorite and eventual division winning Colorado Avalanche. That was one of the best Stars games of the season. I remember being in the box at that game. The crowd was absolutely electric. And it, of course, just started early when the Stars got on the board quick. I mean, it was hard to overcome that Stars lead at home because the fans, Stars fans already the most energetic in the National Hockey League. But then when the team is scoring not only one, but 2 goals to start the game, that place is near impossible to get a win in as the road team. But that wasn't the only milestone Joe Pavelski got. On January 12th, he recorded his first 5-point game in his career against the Seattle Kraken with 2 goals and 3 assists, which was just so insane to me. A guy that's played as long as he has and a guy who's had as much success. I mean, he was a part of some really good San Jose Sharks teams in the earlier parts of his career. Never had a 5-point game, though, but this game against the Kraken was one of his best of the season. He put on an absolute clinic, and he would, again, later go on to record a different milestone on April 23rd at home against the Seattle Kraken with his 500th career assist on a Jason Robertson goal. And then another milestone reached that involves Jason Robertson. On March 4th, he recorded his 900th career NHL point with an assist to who else but, of course, Jason Robertson in a game where Robertson would finish with a hat trick. And that was one of Jason Robertson's best games of the season, but we'll talk about that a little bit later in this series. And all in all, I mean, this was one of, if not the best season we've ever seen from Joe Pavelski in the NHL, one of the best seasons we've seen from an American-born player in the NHL. And it's no debate that Joe Pavelski was the heartbeat of this team. And of course, it's easy to do that when you are on the ice for every single game. You're out there for your team. You have your team's back, and you are giving it your all 82 games, never taking a day off. When at this point in his career, no one, I don't think, would blame Joe Pavelski for taking a night off, taking a couple games off because he's sore or he's tired. In a day and age where there's all these talks of load management across these sports like the NBA and the NHL with back-to-backs, Joe Pavelski never asking for a day off, never asking for a night off. And I don't think he missed very many practices either. If there was an opportunity for him to be on the ice, he took it. And I think that was an incredible display of leadership that helped propel this Stars team to where they ended up this season, which was pretty deep into the first round of the playoffs against one of the best teams in the league. And it's easy to say, this is a no doubter of a statement, but without Joe Pavelski, this Dallas Stars team does not even sniff the playoffs. Without him on this team, the Stars are looking to get a lottery draft pick. Without him, that erases like a third of the offense that this team was able to generate, both in terms of goals as well as just playmaking, facilitating, and getting some assists as well. So Joe Pavelski has ended up being one of the best acquisitions for the Dallas Stars in the history of the franchise. And there's really never been a moment where he's looked kind of like a mediocre player or a guy who's starting to kind of fall off the rails in his career ever since he came to Big D. And he's truly just been a huge source of energy for this Dallas Stars franchise. And as far as we know, we're getting at least one more season of that Joe Pavelski magic. Coming up after a quick break, we will continue to talk about Joe Pavelski and the reason why he has been so successful this past year. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is brought to you by our friends at Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand that their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Save time and money when using Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every single customer. They have everything that you could possibly need for your car or truck: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car or truck could ever need at rockauto.com. Moving right along on today's episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you again for stopping by and making us your first listen of the day. For your next listen, be sure to check out the Locked On Now podcast, nightly recaps of every NHL game with analysis from our local experts. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast at. Let's continue to talk about Joe Pavelski and the phenomenal season that he had for this 21-22 Dallas Stars team. And we all know that Joe had an incredible season. This was a career year for him. We just spent the entire last segment talking about the numbers he put up, the milestones that he shattered, and just his chemistry with Roope Hintz and Jason Robertson. But it kind of begs the question, why is he continuing to be so successful? And why is he continuing to improve 12 seasons into his career? I mean, it's just natural that eventually Father Time gets a hold of every single athlete. I mean, Father Time is undefeated in the world of sports in terms of finally just getting to an athlete, and whether it's injuries or fatigue or off the field / court / rink issues, something eventually comes up and slows a player down, which is just one of the unfortunate truths of the world of sports. But he hasn't seemed to have caught up to Joe Pavelski just yet. And I do have a theory on this. I think that the reason Joe Pavelski had the season that he has had is because he is truly at peace with where he is at this point in his life and in his NHL career. I mean, he's been playing on a competitive team pretty much ever since he came to Dallas. I mean, they went to the Stanley Cup Finals in his first season with the team. They were competitive last year and were just a few points out of making it to the Stanley Cup playoffs. And then, of course, this year they go to overtime in Game 7 against the Calgary Flames. And again, his best statistical year. I mean, the Dallas Stars have been a competitive team and made the playoffs 2 of the 3 seasons that he has been a member of the club. And, I think that he moved to a just better sports city. That's no disrespect to the city or community of San Jose. I know that San Jose has a very passionate and committed fan base, but Dallas is just one of the better sports cities in the world, if you ask me. I mean, Joe Pavelski has done really well for himself and kind of made himself into a star in a market that is very crowded and a market that is primarily a football market, with the biggest brand in sports being located just a few miles down the road in Arlington with the Cowboys. And then, of course, having to share the same building as the best player in the NBA. I mean, this is not an easy city for NHL players to become stars in, just because the NHL and hockey might be the 4th most popular sport in this market. But Joe Pavelski has found a way in just 3 seasons to become one of the biggest sports names in the entire Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, which is easier said than done. I mean, there's guys that have been with this team for longer than that who are hardly recognizable by people that maybe just watch the Stars casually or, don't really watch hockey that much. And Joe Pavelski has come out of nowhere and asserting himself as an all-star, as an alternate captain on this team, a leader of this team, both on and off the ice. And I think it also stretches to beyond the world of sports and off the field of play. I think that his family is in a really good spot just based on kind of what we see from social media. Obviously, we don't know every detail, and we shouldn't, because most of his family matters should be kept within the family, and that is his personal, private life. But what we do see on social media leads us to believe that his family is in a really good spot. His son, Nate, was all over Dallas Stars social media all season long, especially during the All-Star break. I mean, he was right there front and center of the attention with the rest of the hockey world, getting to interact with a bunch of different players from around the league, getting to interact with other players' kids and other families. And then, of course, even just at Stars games, we got to see pictures and videos of him in the locker room after some of Pavs' big milestones, and just getting to see how Joe Pavelski's teammates treat his family, just, again, in those really quick moments on videos or pictures. I think that speaks volumes to how comfortable he feels in the city and how comfortable his family seems to feel in a place like Dallas. And he's even said in post-game press conferences that he really does enjoy it here, and he enjoys the camaraderie within the locker room. He's able to and as a result of that, able to focus on his craft and able to kind of play a little more loosely and freely. I mean, again, this is a guy that has played 12 seasons in the NHL, so he has made his fair share of money. His family is likely doing very well financially, and so there's not this pressure of, oh, I have to keep grinding to continue to make a roster because we have to have X amount of money or we have to make ends meet. I think Joe Pavelski has done really well for himself and had a long and pretty much scandalous free career where he's just been known as a stand-up guy and a great hockey player. And in turn, that has led to this long, prosperous career for him where he's been able to provide for himself and his family. And so that allows him to play a lot more loosely and just enjoy the game for what it is and continue to get better, which again is just benefiting him in the long run, which means he gets to sign more contracts and make more money for he and his family. And of course, he, in terms of all that, he just loves the sport, and you can see it in the way that he plays. You can see it in the way that he addresses the media and talks about his teammates and talks about the game itself. And then, of course, we hear the stories all the time. He's the first guy in at practice. He's always working on the weaker spots of his games. A guy like Pavelski at this point in his career doesn't have very many weak spots, but whenever they do show up, he addresses them and he goes to work on them as quickly and as hard as possible. You know, he's the first guy in and the last guy out of the door at practice. And I know his teammates take notice of that. The media takes notice of that. And he is getting all the praise for that. And that's a huge credit to why his game is continuing to thrive and flourish at this point in his life. And of course, you can just tell, obviously, it's no coincidence that he has been able to play every single game for this Stars team in the past 2 seasons. It's very clear that he takes care of his body. He takes care of himself physically and mentally, and he just takes care of business on and off the ice. I mean, he makes smart decisions out on the ice, and I mean, clearly he's likely dieting the right way, and just being responsible in his time off the ice. Of course, being a father and spending time with your family allows you to do such things. But I mean, just again, never really any bad stories about Joe Pavelski in the news. Really, no one out there speaking poorly of him or saying that he's been a bad teammate or treated someone unfairly or treated someone poorly. I mean, only good things said about him within the organization, within the city of Dallas. But then, of course, I mean, if you've listened to any other crossovers or, you know, shows with guests on it, we talk about Joe Pavelski, it's only good things that we hear from him and see from him. And so I think that's just a huge, you know, it shows us why he is continuing to be so successful, because he plays the game the right way and he goes about being a professional athlete the right way, which is just increasingly more rare as time goes on. I mean, very few guys can do what he's done. I mean, you look across all sports, and even some of the greatest of all time have some sort of, you know, baggage attached to their name or attached to their legacy. But when it's all said and done, Joe Pavelski will have very little of that. And I think that that's just what makes him one of the better NHL players and one of the better athletes of his generation. Coming up next, after another quick break, we will talk about what the future looks like for Joe Pavelski, namely this upcoming 2022-2023 season. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is brought to you by Built Bar. Imagine dipping your finger into that plastic tub of birthday cake frosting and then opening your eyes and realizing that it was only 150 calories and 16 grams of protein. That is what it's like to eat a birthday cake puff from Built Bar. Built Bar sent me a package of the cake puffs, and let me tell you folks, they are absolutely delicious. They taste just like a birthday cake, but it's much more healthy than eating a slice of birthday cake. This is a limited time flavor with 150 calories, 16 grams of protein, and only 9 grams of sugar. It is the perfect alternative if you are looking for something that is delicious and healthy. All Built Bars are covered in 100% chocolate. So even if you have that sweet tooth, you can still get your fix there while still not eating unhealthy food. You can go to built.com right now and use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off your order at built.com. We're closing out this final segment of today's episode of Locked On Stars. This is your host, Dane Lewis, at Dane_Lewis on Twitter. You can find me there. You can also find our show on Twitter as well, at Locked On Stars. And I think we are, at the time of recording this, 2 subscribers away from from 300 subscribers on YouTube. So if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and consider pressing the subscribe button. Just takes a few seconds. It's free and it helps the show out a ton. Also, leaving a comment down below helps the show. So if you have a favorite Joe Pavelski moment from the season, let me hear it down in the comments. Maybe there's a milestone or a moment from him that I missed in the first segment of the show. So go ahead and leave a comment about your favorite Joe Pavelski moment from the past season, and we can all reminisce on the great year that he had. But let's look ahead to the future for number 16 of the Dallas Stars. We all know that Joe Pavelski will be coming back for at least one more season with Dallas, as he inked a deal during the season, a one-year contract where he will be getting paid $5.5 million. And in my eyes, I said this at the time, and I still believe this now. I think this is a fantastic contract where he's not getting paid too much money. I think this is an appropriate amount to pay a guy who could likely be, this could be kind of his last go around. This could be his farewell tour, which I imagine with a guy like Joe Pavelski, he probably won't publicly say that until the end of the season. But I think that there's a very real opportunity that this could be kind of his last ride as a NHL player, which is really bittersweet. But I think he has a great opportunity to have another historic season. And I think that the Stars could still be fitting into this playoff contender window. Obviously, the first round exit, not ideal for this team, but I still think they have some pieces that they can bring back, and they have some opportunities to go out and get some other talent in the offseason that can maybe push them over the edge and make them an even stronger contender in the NHL playoffs. So great contract for Joe Pavelski. He's still getting paid a good amount of money at the end of his career, but he's not hurting the Dallas Stars as far as cap space very much. And it looks like we're going to get to see one more go around for the Pavelski, Hintz, Robertson line, which is always a good thing. The more we can see of that line, the better. And I think that's going to benefit the Stars greatly to have that cornerstone at the start of the season. I mean, they might have to move some other lines around and figure out the rest of the lineup during training camp and the preseason. But I think whoever the coach is and whoever's on the coaching staff can know, okay, these three guys really work together and they are glued together by Joe Pavelski. I think that he will continue to rack up points and have a really productive season as long as he is playing alongside Rope and Robo with the amount of shots that they take and the amount of offense that they can generate. There's no doubt in my mind that he can have as productive of a season he had this year while playing alongside those two guys. And, maybe it's far-fetched to believe that he can get to 80 points again, but even if he can be half as good as he was this past year, this coming season, I would consider that a success. I'm saying minimum 40 points from Joe Pavelski this season. I think it's successful. Just again, given his age, a lot of guys his age don't produce 80-point seasons. But if we can get even 40, I think that's a success. But I think that's lowballing it. I think Joe Pavelski will score at least 50 points this upcoming season, if not more. Again, if he does what he has always done in his career, which is take care of himself and remain healthy and have a really good training camp, have a really good summer, I think he has a fantastic opportunity to maybe set some new records with assists and points. I think especially with the assist, again, given how much guys like Rope Hintz and Jason Robertson like to shoot the puck and how they can create space for themselves after taking passes from Joe Pavelski. And so I expect him to manage his offseason well. I expect him to spend a lot of time with his family. I think that will be good for him to kind of take that mental break from the game of not having to worry about hockey right now. And I mean, obviously, that's if there are benefits of getting eliminated from the playoffs, that's one of them is the offseason starts earlier. So he gets more time with his family, but he also gets more time to take care of himself and recover and also just improve his game in practice. I'm sure that he will continue to work hard to keep his body in tip-top shape, but also work to improve his craft, whether that is his tip-ins in front of the net, his ability to collect those rebounded shots that bounce off the pads of goalies, or maybe he'll look to add a new aspect to his game. Obviously, his older age would lead us to believe that maybe on the defensive side, he could be a step behind, which is true. But maybe he can find a way to improve his defensive prowess while on the ice, because I think that would be a huge piece, because even guys like Rope Hintz are actually a pretty good two-way skater. And if we can get Joe Pavelski to be that level of a two-way player, that would be a success. Obviously, he's not going to have the speed that Rope Hintz has, but I'm sure there's something that he and his camp can look to do to find a way to improve his game, because given the way that he's continued to do it for 12 seasons of his career, Joe Pavelski is not going to stop now in terms of looking for ways to improve himself. So I'm predicting right now, way too early predictions, at least 50 points from Joe Pavelski. If we want an actual number, which this stuff's always hard to predict, I'll say that he finishes with 72, a little bit less than what he got this season, but I still expect him, if he's able to play most of the games this season, even if he's able to play 80, 85% of the games, I think that he will be very productive if he's able to play alongside his two incredible line mates in number 24 and number 21. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you again for making Locked On Stars your first listen of the day. Now go make your second listen of the day, Locked On NHL. From first round matchups to each Stanley Cup kiss, Locked On NHL covers the playoffs like no other. Hear the latest news and opinions from local experts every Monday through Friday. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast at. Be sure to tune in tomorrow as we will be continuing our player evaluation series. We're going to keep it on the top line and talk about number 24, Rope Hintz. Going to be a very fun episode, getting to take a deep dive into one of the up-and-coming stars for this Dallas franchise, as well as just in the NHL in general. Be sure to find me on Twitter at Dane_Lewis and our show as well at Locked On Stars. Be sure to subscribe to our show on your favorite podcasting platform and YouTube if you do not do so already. But thank you guys so much again for tuning in. We will see you back here on Thursday.